It's going to be the archaeology of unusual things, exotic foods like snails, dormice, monkey's brains, and rotting fish sauce. Which I'm sure you're all going to enjoy. Next week we are doing the archaeology of cider, and may I make the wonderful comment, each week, Ellen, you get better and better. So, you know, what it is, right, Ellen's got her own sort of direction in life. It's for Ellen, really.
Fattening us up for Christmas.
And we'll talk about the event stuff that I've handed out in a short while. But I want us to get straight into it. So we're going to look at a few images. Not many images. Simply because I think we all basically know what snails look like. Hopefully. And I think we all know what monkey's brains looks like. But we're going to start off with this. So there you go. What's happening? Whenever this happens, I always blame Lynn. Yeah. Because it is Lynn's fault. Pete's sake. On. Come on. There. Bingo. There you go. And with opening this today, we're looking at a banquet scene, as you can well make out. Roman banquets were slightly different than this. This is obviously a Victorian portrayal of a Roman banquet. Banquets would usually be organised around much lower couches and much lower tables than this. And it's portraying a large variety of different foods there. Some of the foods that we're going to discuss today, like monkey's brain, I've actually had myself, I've tasted it. And years later I realised I was eating an illegal substance, which is banned. And I've obviously eaten snails, which I'm sure some of you have eaten in the room. I haven't tried garum, fish sauce. We're also going to be looking at skewered dormice. I've tried quails, but I haven't actually tried dormice. Have any of you tried dormice? Snails?
Yeah. Snails, yeah.
Okay. Monkey's brain?
Definitely not.
Brains,
no.
Yeah.
What? You've had brains, yeah, good. What about Roshin?
Oh, I've had brains. I mean, lots of food in this country has got brains in.
Exactly. What about rotting fish sauce? Now, come on, it's still available. Dennis?
Thai fish.
Well, you get stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which smells horrible.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Swedish things, isn't there, where they have this rotting fish in a tin.
Oh, yeah.
Which is supposed to be really pongy, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
I never tried it.
Yeah, well, we'll... right, Lynn, you know you had those examples of cheese, which I really loved, right? Don't bring anything along that I've discussed today. Right? So, I think this area of exotic things to eat, I've had to keep within a small number of items. We could have gone into looking at eating a variety of animals' testicles and their evidence in archaeology, which will in fact be the last lecture of the series of foods that we're doing. And obviously in the new year we're going to be looking at the archaeology of art.
Well, we had lamb's balls every spring.
Somebody had to.
Yes, because you
fry
have
them
something
up.
with them and you can.
Yeah.
Sweetmeats.
They fried them
Sweet
all up.
nuts, that's
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing wrong with lamb balls.
Yum.
No. Have them on.
No,
I'm a
no.
celebrity.
Don't look at me like that.
Uh,
I'm hanging on to mine.
So, this is known as a gilarium. A gilarium is the home for
Oh, Glisglish.
no.
Snails?
No.
Tarum.
What? Well, you're not going to put monkeys in there, are you? So what's left?
No, they get out.
Brains.
No, monkeys,
Oh,
mate, no. What?
Balls.
Mice!
Oh, mice.
Oh,
Well, that's what I said.
You didn't!
I said the Latin name of them.
Well, me and Ellen didn't know that! And by the way,
What did you say? Mice.
Glistlers.
by
Yes,
Dormant.
Glistless. Yeah, I didn't know.
Piscot,
Glistless. G-L-I-S.
I was...
Postcod is the
Welsh.
word for fish. What are you turning them into fish for?
I thought we were on about fish then! Oh my god, I'm getting so confused. By the way,
mice then after.
Mices.
Mices.
Still
Mice.
mice. Most mice.
Are
Mice.
they alive when they go in there?
Yes!
Fat them up.
I was discussing the lecture with Angus McCluge yesterday about, and he's looking forward to it. He said, "Mike, yeah," and then I said, and he said, I'll have to make sure my CRB check's up to date." And I'm thinking, oh no, he thinks he's. So he said, "You know, if not children, don't you?" And he says, "I said it's adults," and he said, "Oh right, okay." So
That's not his real name, is it?
Angus McClude.
No, it can't be.
Anyway,
I wonder
so
where he's from.
pardon?
I wonder where he's from.
North of Llantwit.
Oh, brilliant.
So these little things here is described that these little things you can either put the little nuts and stuff in, but apparently these are little homes. These little inside the pots themselves. That's where the mice are going to sort of bed themselves down. These are really large pots, and you've got all these different shelves. And there would have been a lid on this, and there's little holes that the little mices would have actually had air and stuff coming in. And apparently, right, the size of these dormice are huge. It's been described by Roman writers that they were the size of the body of a squirrel. They were massive. In fact, as larger than a large rat that's wandering around in your garden. They were big things. So these containers are really quite large. You could get absolutely massive ceramic containers in archaeology, but this is probably around that size. Okay, these are large containers about that tall. You could see the ones in the ground. They were so large that they couldn't be moved. So they're really large containers for these dormice. I'm going to chuck in here as well, which is something quite relevant. When we discuss extinct species of vole and relatively on the borderline creatures like various mice and small rodents in this country that are on the brink of extinction today or become extinct in the Roman period, you can understand why. Because somebody's over there has got one of these galariums. They've eaten all their dormice, and they're thinking, oh, these little things wander around the field, we'll chuck them in there as well. Always be very wary what rodents you put in here. So if you put sort of little field mice in with a rat, okay, the little field mice ain't going to last long because the rats are going to kill them. So it's likely as well that people really didn't understand that they had to be proper dormice. Right, bred dormice, not the wild dormice, they have to be the proper bred dormice. So it's quite likely that some of these species that we see on the brink of extinction or become extinct in the Roman period was because of this practice that they loved eating these creatures. And these galariums have been found a multitude of archaeological sites. So it's the in thing, like it was in the Roman period. And of course, Kathy's going to tell us about her snails later on, but it's like when people get fed up with these, eating these animals, then they just release them. Okay, so it's quite likely that lots of sort of things that have been introduced in the Roman period was because the Romans were fed up with eating them. So there you go. Little image of a little mouse down there, about that tall, a big body there with little holes in, and you'd have had a cap lid. And it's very interesting, the descriptions that we actually find about these dormice. And in fact, if I just did a whole lecture on eating these dormice and the written evidence and the archaeological evidence, that would be great. We've got to chuck a couple of monkey's brains in there, haven't we, to make it sort of a little bit more spicy. The monkey's brains I had weren't spiced or flavoured. It was actually quite nice. But then again, apparently you shouldn't be eating brains because it's
Yes.
various nasty
right,
things.
yeah.
Scots Yakov disease springs to mind. So in this little picture, okay, a mosaic itself is portraying the foods that they loved eating, including this little monster and with a walnut there. They loved eating walnuts, these little mice, and so did the Romans. So
A dormouse has got a big
A dormouse is
fairy
different,
tail.
yeah.
It's not that.
It's a solid straight pig.
yeah,
isn't it?
I'll come back. I'll come back to that. I'll come back to that. In the description of this, it's portraying a smaller mice rather than so. But at the end of the day, this is part of their diet. Okay, this is part of the diet alongside all the larger rodents like the dormice, the little mice as well, the quails, everything. They're eating everything in the Roman period, and that's showing it again. Okay, so with the Romans really being into their exotic foods, again, gives us another exotic take of the Romans. Now the Galarium, lots of them. We've got lots of them in the archaeology. Lots of them surviving, complete ones. People are thinking, don't really want this Galarium anymore, we'll just chuck it over there, it's no longer useful. Can't do anything with it. It's got holes in it. You can't really store anything in it. It's got little compartments inside. It's just no good for anything. So when you finish with that, just chuck it away. It's quite likely that the fashion-eating small rodents and little birds and dormice and all these different types of things, that fashion probably completely fell out of use when Roman civilization collapsed. And this is why we get lots of these surviving in the archaeology. There. Look at the size of some of these Galariums. They love them. Huge little sort of, this is what's left in the ground, so they just sort of placed them into the ground as well, because they wouldn't really be able to move them. And this is obviously attached to a Roman kitchen, beaten floor. Another Galarium there. I don't know, but these people love their little rodents, okay? They love their dormice. And this is the evidence for it. Lots of the evidence that we get for dormice usually comes from Italy and Spain and those types of countries. But here as well, there's a large scale a body of evidence saying that they absolutely love eating the dormice in Britain. And Pliny tells us that as well, and lots of other Roman writers, which we're going to come to and talk about in a short while. And in fact, do you know what I think we should do? Dormice is the end of the lecture, but we're going to do it at the beginning, bit of continuity. Then we'll get a rotten, putrefying fish sauce. And in fact, apparently, like lots of things in this country, lots of things being introduced by the Romans are now scarce, like the Burgundian snail that's wandering around there. Kathy, not yet. Apparently, you can't handle these things. You need a license. Even though they were introduced by the Romans in this country, because they're rare, they're on the edge of becoming extinct, and it's sort of the same with dormice as well. So this article here, it goes on to pass the dormice, breeding, selling, and eating honeyed dormice in antiquity. Wonderful process. And one thing we need to chuck in here is the other things that we ain't going to look at today. And the one example of that are frog's legs. Okay? The problem is with the archaeological evidence of frogs' legs is that the frogs may have just sort of snuck in somewhere and they just died. Okay? And here we go, dormice. There were also dormice rolled in honey and poppy seed and supported on little bridges soldered to the plate. In a work by Protonius in Satyricon. Satyricon was basically a satire about Roman food habits, which were quite bizarre in the least. And here we go. And I just want to show you that. This is that mosaic again, and the caption reads: "The famed so-called Astaratos Okos mosaic now at the Vatican Museum has a small mouse." There he is, portraying our various little rodents and stuff. On it, that is much smaller than the Roman dormouse would have been. these, as I said, the Roman dormice are huge, massive things. So they may seem cute, and they may seem adorable as little hamsters, oh well, fairly big hamsters, as a child, and thus have sympathy. These were part of a delicious, extensive cuisine that the Romans loved. They loved their little critters. First of all, dormice, the Latin glis, glis, are quite large rodents that are more akin to squirrels. Roman villas often raised edible dormice to be eaten locally or sold at the market to those with expensive taste. They could be stuffed with all sorts of things and then used for stuffing themselves. Lots of the evidence from the sites in Italy have turned up the remains of the dormice themselves. They had a range of dormice on offer. So it wasn't just, so here we go, different types of dormice on offer. This is from our site. I'll keep this on anyway. This is a Poggio, a Roman villa north of Rome. This is some evidence for it. And each of these containers here contained 3 different types of dormice. The garden dormouse, the hazel dormouse, and the edible dormouse. All these mices would be eaten. And obviously the hazel dormouse is a little dormouse that look like hazels. There you go. They would fatten them up with the protein value of all these nuts. They would just chuck them in there. And as soon as these little things are big enough, smack the little sod on the side, skin it, take the entrails out, stuff it, job done, put it on the table. Obviously you need to fry it, you know, you've got to fry it a little bit. But mind you, the Romans would have eaten these things raw as well. The Romans did lots of things in different ways that are quite sort of, mind you, Dennis saw lots of things being eaten raw in Japan, didn't you, Dennis?
I can't think. Maybe, yeah.
Fish, for one.
Sushi. Yeah.
So these rodents were fattened and placed in ceramic containers, usually buried, with little ledges inside them and with holes poked through the walls whilst they were still wet before they're fired. And water could be poured through the top. I don't really understand why somebody's put that out. You just take the top off and just put water in there because you'd have to put the nuts in there. Can't force nuts through there. So these vessels were called dolia, or as we, and during the winter hibernating period, dormice were given chestnuts, walnuts and acorns of various nuts along with water so that they could be brought on to be eaten the following year. Pliny notes that these little critters also like beech nuts. And lots of these have been found in the excavations. The galariums have been found in the excavations at Pompeii itself, galarium. And there you go. Lots of big ones on it, on display. Don't need that now. So, it's been noted, it's almost as if there was a sub-economy for dormice. Okay, they were dormice traders. There would be dormice with the galariums. What you would do, right, I've mentioned this so many times before, it's the contents of the containers that are valuable, not actually the containers themselves. So you'd have these really complicated galarium things, imagine in Kaya went, and you'd have a load of dormouse in there, sort of eking away, and you would say, right, do you want 5 dormouse? Yeah, well, take the galarium with you, feed them up a little bit, and then eat them. And people would think, oh, I'm not keeping this galarium, they would just toss it away. So this is part of the smaller, in brackets, livestock economy for Roman civilization, and alongside that you would see the consumption of pigeons and doves. All respectable Roman villa would have kept their pigeons and doves, and they absolutely loved those little thrushes. They loved their geese, ducks, peacocks, hare, boar, roe and fallow deer. Absolutely loved their snails, their dormice. various different fish, various different mollusks, there's all kinds of descriptions. They were all there to be eaten. And this was all part, you can imagine, that a Roman villa owner would have sort of had little compartments, little buildings for all these animals we're describing, for their guests. The more courses, the more variety of food you have on offer, as we have today, the more elite and the more of the Roman way the people's homes you're actually visiting are. So you can actually see that they're going to have a variety. Yeah, by the way, that dormouse there is a hazelnut dormouse, and that's an edible dormouse. You know, you're tasting the differences. You can obviously tell that from the flesh that you're eating with pigeons and doves. There are a number on display in the British Museum if you ever get the chance to go there. These small delicacies were often to be seen as a key element to the Roman course of within their food. They could be seen as starters. Various different descriptions that we have. We've got them roasted, rolled in honey and poppy seed, and just sort of taken as we would crackers and cheese. See? Didn't plan this. It's described by a Roman writer, Apicus. Apicus says in a recipe, it is stuffed, dormice, with a force meat of pork and small pieces of all the other dormice as trimmings. All of this stuffing contains pepper, nuts, and broth and fennel. Put the dormice thus stuffed in an earthen casserole, roast in the oven, or boil in the stock pot. Double stuffed dormice appear to have been best when rolled rather than boiled.
I bet they were, yes. That would have been, I mean, do you think of them nestling in your casserole dish? Yeah.
Your Romatov.
Your Romatov.
A bit like
I like it.
cooking sheep's hearts.
Would you really?
Like that.
Exactly. On this little bit here, because we've got lots more to look at dormice. It's these little guys are part of the Roman diet without doubt. They're part of the luxury market, and they would have gone for hefty sums. It's not to subsist on honeyed dormice, but I'm sure that if you're rich enough, that could be a diet for months. Because we do have examples where there are lots of galariums being excavated. Just as most Roman literature provides a reflection of the elite living rather than a mirror of the impoverished day-to-day life of most Romans. But I would say that everyone would have tried getting a hold of their own little dormice, their own little galariums, using anything that was available: voles, rats, field mice, the full works, anything, to be like the Joneses. And that could have undoubtedly led to the scarcity of lots of our rodents that we find out there today. And to be said as well, that you could see that the idea of the diet, the texture of the diet, the understanding of the diet, doesn't die in the Roman period. You've got the Normans coming over here. And we're seeing that the Normans coming over here with all their monastic orders, it's those monks from the continent that would have been familiar with the dormouse as well, reintroducing them again, along with the various other things that the monks are introducing, such as terrapins. Okay, we see that they are available within monastic sites. They introduce these little terrapins. People are thinking, my God, these little sort of turtly type weird things floating around in the water. If you put your finger in there, they bite. That was part of the diet as well. So it's not just the Romans introducing these things. It's actually the monastic orders as well, because they're coming from Europe, and they eat really strange things over there. And we don't eat strange things like haggis and so on. But anyway, so all these things are being reintroduced. And the other thing as well is about the Roman world and the Roman diet and the Roman understanding and all that sort of gubbins, is that even if you're a poor person you may have an opportunity to try all these strange things. Because on the 17th of December to the 25th of December, you have the festivity of Saturnalia, where the aristocrat would dress up in peasant's clothing and eat like a peasant. And the servants would then be the lords of the house that would whip their masters for a short period of time. And the servants would eat the things that the masters would eat. And that's Saturnalia. And that's basically what our Christmas is based on today. So, we see the archaeology and we also see the evidence of these little critters' bones as well. Let's look a little bit more about these dormice. I think it's a bit of a mixture of an article here, so not to repeat things. As with lots of these things, people are really researching these things today. And you've got to put these galariums into a category slightly over there, like the amphora. So you can imagine that amphora, the wines being the oil, the garums being exported all the way around the Roman world. You can also think that somebody's going to be putting a load of nuts in these containers, a little bit of moisture in there, putting a load of little baby dormice in there. So by the time you get from Rome to Crete, they're going to be hopefully fattened up enough. Then they can be instantly placed on the table and obviously fried or roasted or whatever, or eaten raw or however you're going to do it. There is talk, again I keep repeating this, these things can be eaten raw. I wouldn't want to try it, but there you go. But it's likely that as they're a container to transport as well, they're roughly in that category of amphora as well. And talking about in the category of amphora as well, the 100-foot tall mound outside Rome that's containing billions of individual items of amphora also contain loads of these galariums as well. Because people would think, all right, I've eaten the dormice, what do I do with them next? Let's just toss it away and go down to the market to get another galarium full of these little rodents. We do it today. We do it today. Michelle goes out shopping and every time she comes back with these 10-pence bloody shopping bags, and then she goes shopping again, I got more of these things that I just got to chuck out. We do it today, and that's what they did in the past with these galariums. They just tossed the galariums out, they just tossed the amphora out, and they just went out and bought a new galarium with more of these rodents in. Because the galarium is to be discarded. The dormice ain't. And with many, I know we've all had the experience of having a beautifully, a bottle of wine like this, right? And you've got like little sort of, within the mould, you have little berries and it's sort of nicely twisted and turned and you think, oh wow, I'm going to keep the bottle. You're not supposed to keep the bottle, you're supposed to toss it away. You're supposed to drink the wine, aren't you, Goff?
Well, when you can win it in the raffle, yeah. Or not.
That's sad, and that should go to the ladies, I think. We need Ruffy.
Actually, there is a woman in a room that has actually won the bottle of wine today. Okay, and it's going to seem to be favouritism when I give it to her.
Will you?
Oh, it can't be Lynn and Chris because you didn't buy a raffle ticket last week, did you?
I did.
Lynn didn't.
I didn't have any money.
It's probably Barbara.
Barbara, yeah.
Well, Dennis has won a prize this week. Steve has won a prize this week. Keith has won a prize this week. Kathy's won a prize this week. And somebody else has won the bottle of wine. Who isn't on that list?
Were these rich person's food, these dormice, or would it be everybody?
What I'm getting at is the layer of Roman society. Like the Joneses, they would have thought, right, the Roman world is about copying. Let's just do this a minute. The Roman world is about copying, being like the Joneses every time. Pax Romana comes over here, somebody builds a Roman villa, they've got the mosaic, they've got the hypercore system, they've got the frescoes, they've got all this, they've got different rooms, they've got different rooms for this and that, right? And then it comes into food. So somebody down the road is thinking, how can we emulate Rome? How can we be Rome? And that's the point. You be your Rome, and in Rome, when you start taking on Roman ways, this is really, really important. That's the point. So if you can't have a mosaic on the floor, like the guy down the road, the next best thing could be the food thing. You get their discarded galarium, right? And you take it home and you think, what do they put in these things? They take these, they put these little mice in there, right? So you fatten the mice up. So in a moment, you're eating the delicacy of Rome. It might not be a dormouse, but you're doing the Roman thing, right? So, in other words, it's not an elite food, right? It can be sort of, okay, I know they're really good cheeses, right? But you can go to Sainsbury's and get a really cheap cheese, right? So that's the poor man's cheese, okay? I've got to be very careful what I say now. But obviously, that cheese is a better cheese than the other cheese. Okay, so it's the person going to Sainsbury wanting to be like the Joneses, and that's Roman society. It's that idea of Pax Romana. And it's like snails as well. Okay, you don't know what type of snails they're eating, right? So what you get hold of is snails that look big enough out there, and you do the same thing. And this is where things get very awkward with fish sauce. People are going to start copying that, but unfortunately, if you get it wrong, you're going to kill everybody. So, there are ways, and there are sort of ways around this. And the point to be made is that the point to be made is that anything that looks or might be Roman, you become Roman. So the ancient Romans consumed some strange foods, as we know, and some other things like it was very popular to eat sows' wombs. I don't think I'm going to find the archaeological evidence for that. This is why I didn't do that one. And these rodents themselves, there's a little bit more information here. Some of it is repeating. But these are temporary homes for them, these dormice, because they were primed to their plumpness. I like that word, primed to their plumpness. And as soon as they're plump, they could be eaten. Here we go, dormice, as we have today. The Roman dormice were much bigger and substantive than their sort of natural counterparts. They were huge things. These were long considered extravagances, but we've said that if you want to be like the Joneses, you could have that exotic thing as well. They have Pliny writes that alongside the dormouse, that anything small enough and cute enough would be eaten. Now, there's a point to be made here, which will paint completely a different picture on ancient Rome than you could get anywhere else. Pliny writes roughly in the 70 AD, before he tries to rescue them at Pompeii in 79. He writes that the Roman lawmakers were getting very worried about the Romans eating all these little birds and all these little critters. There was legislation passed because the Roman legislators were so worried that you could only eat marketed grown dormice, and you could only eat avians, you could only eat birds that have actually been bred for that purpose. It was now going to be outlawed. You couldn't go out there and just catch a rat and eat it. You couldn't go out there and catch a field mouse. You couldn't go out there and catch a robin or something. It had to be bred for that purpose, because the Romans were worried themselves. They knew that eventually all these small rodents, all these small birds would become extinct, because everyone was doing it. And this is what Pliny writes, which I thought was extremely interesting. It puts a different take on the Roman world. These people ain't just out there wanting to bring to mass extinction of all these animals. The legislators in Rome were very worried. And they passed legislation to stop eating all these wild beasts. but I don't think anybody's going to be going around checking what's in your galarium, are they? Or what's in your stomach. And you could think the country estates would harvest these things on a mass scale. There's a Roman writer, there's so much in the writing about this. There's a Roman writer known as Varro. And Varro writes on the issue of Roman agriculture out there in the countryside, on the gentlemen's estates. And he writes about the tiny critters that people would like to eat, like the snails, would be kept in certain containers so that they wouldn't escape and they could just be farmed. Certain bees for honey, and dormice inside their villas in these galariums. There's lots of writers. There's another Roman writer known as Hyrcanus, and Hyrcanus writes to popularise different fads at the time. So one moment he's writing, right, everybody's got to go out and eat snails. But this is before the birth of Christ. So after that, if he wrote something like that, he would probably have to specify what snails you can eat. Okay, the Burgundian type snail, which you can find in France. Not any old snails out there. Okay, you could. He writes about certain fattenings of dormice. You couldn't eat small dormice, right? You have to eat the big things. Yeah, dormice. Dormice, as it starts to come into the proper Roman world, as Varro cites and writes, he says that before and after the birth of Christ, it was to be seen with those rich landowners out there that these bred captive creatures would themselves be kept and farmed in large estated areas. And I don't know if I can put this across. He also writes that there's one Roman villa in France that has a landscape of 4 square miles. They've got a 4 square mile enclosure completely dedicated to the farming of these dormice. Again, I'm going to repeat here. Pompeius bred captive critters. Again, context. Pompeius bred captive critters in a 4 mile square enclosure. So this is huge.
Well, it wouldn't have been very hard to breed because they
Breed
breed
like-
all the time
breed
anyway.
like
don't they?
But can you imagine the dedication?
Yeah, it's farming of any kind, isn't it?
It's
really?
mass farming of these
Yeah,
creatures.
factory
Mass
farming.
farming.
And just like fishing,
Exactly.
you don't have anything to live it, you only use the slaves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it goes on to say, usually, they've got places that they keep in snails, specific areas for beehives, dormice to be confined. It's referring to casks now, not just these galariums, but casks. So they might be kept in huge barrels with little sort of shelves and levels and stuff in there, right? The reason I know keeping these types of creatures not to eat, but it's best to probably keep them in an earthenware container because in a cask, it's likely that any residue of their waste will build up quite quickly. So with an earthenware container, the liquid will make its way through the container. So that's why. But then again, as we see with Bernard Matthews Farms, if you want a Norfolk black turkey, which costs £100 plus pounds, you're going to sort of grow them in sort of huge sort of factory farm buildings, okay, very, very tightly in amongst each other. And if you're going to make profit out of them, nobody cares. And there's no standards back then either. So if you've got a few dormice and they all die from a disease, just sort of sell them on quickly, you know. I've seen it in modern farming today, but we won't talk about some of the meat that you've been eating. Varro describes on agriculture the unusual quirks of a galarium. It looks like a regular short storage vessel. Problem is, there's holes in it. on the outside. And when you look inside, it looks like an artificial burrow. When building clay containers for dormice, potters used a different plan than when making regular ones, without all this gubbins inside. The jar was well ventilated, known as dolum, well ventilated. In addition, there were channels along the sides and a hollow for holding the food, sometimes keeping the little critters. These food trays could be refilled from the outside with light and air holes to keep the dormice alive naturally, because you wouldn't want them dying too soon, would you? So that's enough of my dormice at this moment and for today, but we'll probably refer to them. But what we're going to do now, we're going to do monkey's brains before we have our break. You're not enjoying this, are you?
I am.
When I said monkey's brains, you're...
Well, I'm not even looking forward to this bit, but...
Look, we're not going to see the inside of the skulls of monkeys.
Oh.
Okay, and now we've got to be very specific about this. The information I got on monkey's brains is quite limited because there's very little out there. Because trade in monkey's brains has been outlawed, but you can.
Not that, because in Japan they were still eating live monkey brains. The dining tables would have holes in them. They would clamp the monkey's head in it, saw off the skull, and eat their brains while they, there. And that wasn't that long ago.
Where was that?
Japan.
Japan.
Ely.
Yeah.
In China and things as well, it wasn't.
Yeah, it was just
Do you know what? I wasn't even going to be that bad, but now you've said it.
This is
That
what they
tops
were
anything, that.
This is what the vegetarian. Yeah.
I'm
Well,
getting that way myself.
you go to
Yeah.
restaurants and they'd have these special tables.
thanks. I think we're all off your
Thanks
cheese.
for sharing, yeah.
No, but we're called humans. We're the most inhumane creatures.
Yeah, we are.
ever
We
been
are.
on the planet.
No?
Yeah, we are. We are very inhumane.
All the others
Yeah, quite.
didn't believe and integrate and breed according to what's inside them. All ours is contorted brains, isn't it?
Exactly.
Awful.
There's a metaphor in itself.
Anyway,
Monkey's brain is obviously monkey's brain dish is naturally a dish that is of a monkey's brain itself, usually served raw. In Western culture, the idea of eating a monkey's brain gives a debased non-understanding of why people are eating monkey's brains in India and China and the likes of Japan, which you've so rightly mentioned. It's before we go on to sort of a little bit of detail there, let's look at sort of popular descriptions of monkey's brains. You could, for example, think, right, it's quite easy for me to stand here talking about garum, rotting fish sorts, snails, and so on. But the idea of eating monkey's brain is seen in fiction, but it's actually real. For example, you do see in the Indiana Jones film, for example, in the film Temple of Doom, where Indiana Jones and the woman he's with, and they've got that wonderful Chinese actor with them. He was a young lad then. He's become really big in Hollywood. And they sit in a room, and around this table, the dishes are served, right? And they're really weird dishes. They have a dish with lamb's eyes in it. Okay. And the woman goes, "Oh, I can't have this. Can you go and get another dish?" Well, there's another dish. He's getting really excited. And they lift the top off, and there's a monkey's head there, with the skull already trepanned, and it's just simply taking the trepanned bit off and scooping out and eating it. Okay, they haven't been cooked, and at that moment the woman collapses on the floor. But that's in the Indiana Jones film. That's in popular fiction, but it's also popular fact. It's also to be seen that because of this popular portrayal of this very unpopular practice today. The Temple of Doom film, they refused to allow it to be filmed in India, and it's also still banned in India because the Indians, because this practice is now outlawed in India, they think that people can go on a holiday there and get a monkey and eat monkey's brains because it's now been outlawed. So the film's still banned because they really want to sort of get rid of this practice completely. And I would say it is wrong. And there's a film called The Faces of Death from 1979, and these tourists, the tourists are placed into a restaurant, and they're offered the house speciality, and the proprietor signals for a server to bring out a monkey, which is then secured inside a pen built into the table. The tourists are given hammers and they proceed to hit the monkey on the head until it is killed. The server then cuts open the skull and removes the monkey's brains onto a plate for the patrons to sample. And you know what? You've just described that. And that's not fiction. Consumption, it is unclear when monkey's brains were being first consumed, but I would say monkey's brains have been consumed by human beings for a very, very long time. We do find evidence as far back as 1.5 million years ago, where some of our ancestors, Homo erectus, you see that there's evidence that they gained access to Anthropocene, who were a type of humanoid, and they would they would have them in caves and they would butcher them, smashing their skulls open and eating their brains. We've got that in the archaeology. We know it happened, right? That's undeniable. And the protein value of a brain is naturally undeniable, except there are things that can happen to you. Actual monkey's brains were historically part of the literature of the Qin dynasty, the Qin Empire, back in the 1600s, where it's said that in the literature where they may have been eaten directly from the skull. Officially today, Chinese policy on the procurement of certain wildlife species makes the serving of monkey's brains now illegal, with now a sentence of 10 years for violators. And I think that's not only just for the chef, but for the person eating the brains themselves. Beyond Asia into Africa, it's said that the natural practice of eating brains was still very much going on in Nigeria, where they would capture highland gorillas, and the tribal chief would consume the monkey's brain and the heart from these highland gorillas as part of his as part of his initiation to become the tribal chief. According to this account, the practice occurred only in specific circumstances, and the killing otherwise would be forbidden, thank God, in Nigeria and Cameroon, and now it is outlawed. Consuming the brain and other nervous system tissues of some animals is considered hazardous to human health, possibly resulting in transmissible diseases such as Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. And in finishing this bit, there was, I think it was the island of Papua New Guinea. It was the practice of cannibalism, and when you would capture somebody, you would then eat their brain. And it said that there was deemed various diseases transmissible from the brain to people actually eating it, and they've tried to stop that as well. But there are probably still people eating monkey's brains on this planet today. On that note,
Yeah, it's horrible. This is a bit gratuitous to me. I don't like this.
but we get snails next, which is nice. I'll get you to pay your money before you go off home. Right, are there any questions? So can I just mention if I can get my sheet, okay, from my file.
Well, everything was eaten from every animal, wouldn't it? Everything.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it would be wasted, would it?
No.
It's all, you know, meat of some kind. If you're hungry, you're going to eat anything.
Right, just one thing. I want a favour from somebody. Anyone who's got their last sheet that I gave them about Hadrian's Wall, who's paid and stuff. I've only got to deleted it from my system, so I need that. Even though I've got it in my diary, right? It's a specific sheet that I want to edit to hand out again. So anyone who's got that sheet, if I can loan it off you until next week, I would be very grateful. The other thing as well is the Hadrian's Wall trip. Yeah, you know that those going on it. We want that settled by the end of the year. Droysloin Castle. We have a one-off special event heading to the Cymraeg Prince Castle of Droeslin. Only attend this event if you have a passion for the period of Cymru being controlled by the Cymro. There are only 6 places available. There's one already gone. And first come, first service. £20 on that one. It's on 5th of January, Saturday. So it'd be good to get an impression on that. Langan, Christmas and New Year's get together. I'd like to know on that one as well. There is a DJ karaoke, some snacks, refreshments. A time of year to celebrate with like-minded people, which is, yeah, Gillian's going. Organised by Michelle and myself at Langan Community Hall. We're asking a voluntary donation of £6, and then everything else will be as the night permits. So, is anyone interested in a Droysloin trip?
Can you describe what this castle is? What's there?
Basically, it's an open castle owned by Cadu, so there's no fee to go in. It's got a beautiful view. It's got really nice high standing walls still, and sort of other areas. And I think we won't just be doing Droysloin. I'm going to chuck something else in there as well.
Where's it near?
It's basically towards Swansea way, so it's not massively far away. It's not in North Wales like Dunbarton and Dunfermline.
I'll probably be interested. Yeah.
It's near the Swansea way, and to be honest with you, it's so difficult to pinpoint on the map. It's that way.
I'll probably be interested.
Michelle got lost one day wandering around that landscape and found the castle, so that's where we're going.
And you say it's a Welsh one, not a Northern one. That was part of it, was it?
Yes, that's right.
Is it very hilly?
It's basically there's nice paths up to it and stuff. It's not massively hilly now, but it's got beautiful views. So if you're interested, let me know next week.
Yeah,
and for the Christmas do, is anyone interested in that from here?
What date is that?
Oh, it's the 29th. Oh, don't tell me I've missed out the bloody date. I have.
You have.
It's the 29th, which is a Saturday. If you're interested in that, I want to know about all these next week.
I'm down.
Okay.
I'm down in
Well,
Brighton that
Driscoll
week.
in Wales, in April might be nice.
Yeah, we never know we could go again. And the reason why I wanted to go on that one was because it was my birthday.
Happy
I wanted
birthday
to
to you. Happy birthday to you.
It's bad luck to sing happy.
Oh, Capricorn, are
And
you?
I'll be 40 then as well. Yeah.
It's your IQ.
What?
Be your IQ.
Yeah,
What day is the 5th of January?
it's a Saturday. You've got to have a real passion for our native Cymraeg creatures.
I'm English. How can I have?
Don't worry, if it goes well. So anyway, we'll have our break now, and I'm sure that one of you has to get a plate and some knives to cut open all that stuff on the table, because it's never going to be eaten. Right.
I'll put the kettle on, shall I, Polly?
Everyone's lost their appetite.